Sound speeds, and welcome to Speed Bumps. This is episode 33. We're in month of December already, and I tell you this, I am happy this year is almost over, and that the negotiations and everything are I'm just happy that this year is over. Let me just word it that way. I mean, granted, the year 2024, we're going to start doing a new IATSE or negotiation, and hopefully we'll be able to get an even better deal than we were last time, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. When it comes down to, negotiations and stuff like that, I wish that we would have had a stronger contract about 2.5 years ago. Personally, I know that we were kind of hands tied because of how we went into the negotiations before we threatened to shut down, before we threatened to strike. But, hey, it is what it is, I guess. I mean, the 2023 was a really rough year for me personally with regards to film production because it was just so slow. I mean, the writer's strike had a lot of productions worried about, starting at the beginning of the year. So they were like, let's just not start up just yet. So they didn't. And, our union, for example, told us that post-COVID we had a big burst, and that was now ending. It was plateauing. So our level of production was a little bit higher than it had been pre-COVID, but following the same kind of line. But whenever I looked at it, it was a lot of TV pilots and a lot of short shows that came to Georgia. It wasn't a bunch of long shows. Like, the union may count a show as a show, but I don't count a 6 or 10 month long show the same as I count a 3-day pilot. Something like that. That 3 days that shoot in Georgia. Anyway, let's waste no more time and get right into it. For our first topic, I thought we would discuss wearing sunglasses. Jeez, it is bright out there. The sun's straight in front of my face. No, we're going to be discussing instead, should you switch out microphones mid-scene? Well, the biggest thing about that you need to keep in mind is that sound mixers will have an opinion on that. So if you're a sound mixer watching this, do you allow your sound department to change out microphones mid-scene? I'm going to throw out a couple of things for you to consider. If, for example, you start off in wide shots and you have wides and tights and you say, I want to get the very best microphone I can on that scene at any given time. It may be that you start with something a little wider, like if you have to play 3 feet of headroom, you might want to start playing with something like a long shotgun microphone, MKH 70 or 8070 from Sennheiser, for example, are common choices. You might end up using a Neumann KMR 82i. It may be something you need a little bit more reach, like a good 3 feet of reach and make it sound really close. But as soon as you punch in a little bit tighter, you might want to have a little wider of a sound as opposed to more narrow of a beam coming through that very directional shotgun microphone. In which case, you might want to, at that point, consider something along the lines of if you were using the Neumann, for example, using a KMR 81, or if you were using the 8070 or 70 MKH, then you might consider using a 60 or 70. The thing about that is, they do sound, different. When you widen out the pattern, you do hear more background noise, and you do hear more sounds because it's not blocking out as many things as it was before. Now, some sound mixers may say, oh no, it's a totally different sound. I don't trust that. I don't want to do that. Let's not change microphones. Once we've established a scene with a particular microphone, we're not going to change it. And some mixers are very, very diehard about that. They don't want the scene to change mics mid-scene. Now, some other mixers I've worked with have said, no, if it means trying to find the best mic for the scene, even if it takes us a few takes, I don't mind going, using one on the wides and one on the tights, because the wide shot's going to sound totally different, and just like it's going to look different. It's going to have more activities going on in there, and we got to dig out our sound in a wider shot. As soon as we punch in, we're not going to see any of that stuff. We don't have to hear it. The thing to keep in mind is that it is the mixer's choice. Now, if the mixer defers to you, then what I would say is don't pick two drastically different microphones. Don't go on the wides for something like a Sanken CS3E, which is one of my favorite microphones. I love that mic. On the wides, when you need about 2 or 3 feet of headroom and a lot of rejection, and then suddenly when you punch in tight, switch to MKH 40, a cardioid pattern with a pretty wide pickup area. I don't think that you should do something like that. Those are two drastically different microphones. But, using something that's kind of similar, like if you were in a wide shot and you want to do something like a DPA 4017B, for maybe 18 inches of headroom or something like that. And then when you punch in really, really tight and you're pushing and crushing it on the frame, then maybe something like a DBA 4018B would be fine. Changing out the capsules only. And some people may argue that that going from a wider pattern to a tighter pattern is not going to lend you the best sound, and that's fine. Some people may say, I don't care, whatever the best sound comes from, I want to make sure that for that particular shot, it's going to sound close. Here's the thing. If you go to a wide shot and you use the boom over a lav, is that going to sound better, or is it going to sound worse than it would be if you were to swap and use the other thing? Like if you use a boom mic for a wide shot, 2 feet overhead, is that going to sound better, or is that going to sound worse than a lav in the same kind of situation? And then once you punch in for coverage, aren't you going to switch that out to the indoor mic or the closer mic? I think you are. So you're not matching microphones there either. So your argument of post is going to have to deal with totally different microphones isn't really valid, because they're going to do that anyway. And I'll tell you this also as a little helpful hint of knowledge if you're trying to make this argument. Post has tools in isotope where they can use to match the ambience and match things a little better than they used to be able to. So if you're just talking about matching microphones and using that as a totally different thing, the microphones are different, you can't do that, and start screaming at your boom operator for it. You can actually. There are things you can do to help premium sounding microphones sound a little bit better in the wides and to help them match in the tights as well. Now, if you're a mixer and you're very much a purist of, no, I don't want to change mics. Once we've dialed in on a microphone, I want to stay with that. Then that's totally fine. If you're a sound mixer that says, you know what, I'm all about getting the very best mic for that particular shot because every shot is different, I appreciate that too. It is your choice. Me personally, what my choices would be, on a wide shot, on a really super wide shot, I might go for something longer like an A16 or an MKH70, or maybe even MKH70. It just kind of depends. Or I might go for a Senken CS3E, depending on exactly how far away it is. I like the way that MKH series microphones pull out sound at a farther distance, but I tell you, I like the sound. It's a little overly bright in my opinion, but I do really like the sound of the Senken CS3E. It's one of my favorite microphones. It in the CSR2, which basically is one that has a lot of reach also, but not quite as much of a laser beam type pattern, but also has a third capsule which you can enable to negate out the rear lobe and cancel out some of that rear lobe of the supercardioid pattern. I really like that mic, and those two are the only real Senken shotgun microphones that I like. I'm not a fan of the CSM1 at all. I'm not a fan of the CSR1, CS1. I think it's a CS1. There's no R1. But, you know, that's just me. Don't let my preferences become yours. If it were me, though, what I would use is a Senken CS3E for anything farther than maybe about 18 inches away from somebody. When you're inside of 18 inches, I would use a DPA 4017B and probably stay on that unless you really needed to punch in tight. And if you're only within about 3 inches over the top of someone's head and it's too reverberant or something like that, I may end up switching to a Sennheiser MKH50 if I want to try to get a little bit more reach with a little less reverb in some environments. And if not, and if I could just punch right into 3 feet or 3 inches overhead, then I'd probably go for a DPA 4018B because I really like that, or maybe even 4018A. I really like those microphones. As you know, if you've been watching the channel for a while, the DPA 4017B is my favorite microphone. Still, to this day, I love that microphone, the way it sounds. Anyway, there you go. Back in the 1990s, there were videography magazines especially, I mean, other magazines did sell this also, that sold Edison to quarter-inch type plugs. All right, if you're wondering what a quarter-inch and say, well, you should be saying, 6.35 millimeters. Okay, look, I'm old school. I'm going to say quarter-inch. I don't care. You can, complain all you want to and say you should use millimeters. That's fine. I don't care that the rest of the world uses it or not. We still refer to in the States, especially if you're in the film industry, quarter-inch plug, eighth-inch plug. We do that when you're talking about going into a headphone cable or connecting up a speaker. We still do that. It's still a very much industry standard. You want to talk about consumer audio and stuff? Fine. You can talk about your little 6.35 millimeters and 3.5 millimeters and all that kind of stuff and freak out, that's fine. For our purposes here, I'm going to go old school and talk about 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch. A lot easier to say too. All right, now that I've said that, let's talk about your good old-fashioned 1/4 inch to Edison plug. The reason this worked is because if you have a speaker and you're running a speaker cable to it, you know that that cable does not need to be shielded. The big reason that you would shield a cable is if you're trying to keep interference away from it, right? So if you have a microphone that puts out such a small amount of millivoltage and it's just, just got a little bit small light signal like a Shure SM7B. We always love using that one because it's a very insensitive microphone. It's so rude. It has a negative 59 dB sensitivity, basically. And if you were to convert that, it would be about the equivalent of 1.1 millivolts per Pascal. So that is the sensitivity. That is very little, and you have to have that in a very high quality shielded cable. Otherwise, it's going to be picking up every little bitty sound or of interference that comes through in the line before it gets amplified and pre-amplified up to make it a line level signal, which is at that point basically considered to be plus 4 dB if it's a pro level line level. All right. At that level, you have a lot more power to it. It is a higher voltage. It's not going to be affected nearly as much by little bitty bits of interference going through the air. Now, or not, but now, if you run that same exact cable over through an amplifier, now you take that signal rather, and you run it through an amplifier, and now suddenly you add behind it 400 or 500 watts, and you really boost it. Little bitty things aren't going to affect it anymore. Now, you're still going to get buzz out of your speakers if you do something like this and you cross right over the top of power cables, especially if you use active speakers. You can't just run an XLR cable over, a whole bunch of, high power, amplifier, cables and stuff like that. If you're running it to a speaker system in like a club, for example, you can't just do that because you're going to pick up buzz all over the place and it's going to go straight into your speakers. Now, that's the reason why you have to route your power cables and your sound cables, and you have to do a whole different world of things right there. If you want to learn more about that kind of sound, though, either go to Dave Ratt's YouTube channel or go to Audio Buff. Both of those YouTube channels are great for this kind of knowledge. Now, that was one of the cool little options you had, is you could carry one of those Edison plugs that converted to 1/4 inch, so you could plug inside of your speaker. But we didn't usually carry those around with us back in the day. But one thing I will tell you that I did as soon as I learned that you could use power cables as speaker cables is I rewired my house. It sounds weird, but I grabbed myself a high quality, I think it was a 50 or 100 foot 12 gauge AWG American wire gauge, 12 gauge 3 or 12-3, which is 3. You could basically do a ground, white and a black, on the inside, the positive, negative, and ground. So it's basically 3 conductors going through a 12 gauge cable. And then what I did is I ran that, and on the amp side, I took the ground and I literally split it and cut like about that much of the end off of my cable, the speaker, the power cable. After I cut off the ends, I cut about that much of it, stripped off the ground, and then basically just went straight in and tied it off with electrical tape. Not the best way to do it by any means, but I did it and it worked. And then I was able to take one side of the ground to the speaker 1 side of the ground to speaker 2, and then use a black and a white for the other side. And then on the other side of the speaker, what I did is I ran it to the very first speaker, which in this case was my left one, and I did the same kind of thing. I split open the rubber jacket on the outside of the cable, and then I cut into that and applied around the outside. It's literally taped, not taped, but I went around this the unexposed ground line and then twisted it until I had a cable that basically just folded it over like this, and I twisted it, and that became my ground. And then I spliced off, I think it was the black one, and made an extra little cable that stuck out there. And then from there, the black cable continued on over to the right cable, or the right speaker, but it was not powering anything because I had already used that on the left speaker. now that I think about it, I think it was the white one that I did, because back in those days we used RCA cables on the back of our TVs and VCRs and stuff, and the red was right and the left was yellow, or video was yellow, left was white. So I probably used the white one going to the left speaker and then the black one for the right speaker. But anyway, so I just tied on let the ground continue on, tied off the whole thing with electrical tape. By no means, like I said, was this the best approach, but it was something that I was able to use and got great results with, because I was pretty particular about isolating my speaker cables from my power. And so it did work. So if you find yourself in a bind, or you want to do something and just have one very fat cable that's fairly inexpensive to run all the way someplace, you absolutely can. Power cables are designed, if it's a 12 gauge, it's designed to take up to 20 amps of power at 120 volts. So it's capable of handling 2600 watts. And if you're talking about a 14 gauge, it's able to get 18, or it's able to get 15 amps at 100 and this just fell. It's able to get 15 amps at 120 volts for a total of 1800 watts. I hope this isn't breaking apart, tearing up my audio. Anyway, we'll see what happens. That just fell. That's crazy. All right, whatever. I should have put it on the inside there. I just didn't this morning. Oh, goody Alan, you're just breaking all the rules today, aren't you? Well, anyway, poor man speaker cable. There you go. It does work if you want to. You don't obviously have to use better quality speaker cable. You're going to be fine. Do you need the 00 gauge, which they used to sell people on in cars? They used to say, you need to have your double gauge, zero gauge, and they were only running like 400 watt amplifiers. No, that was a gag, in my opinion. Monster cable is a scam, because all they do is they basically take a heavier duty cable in a big thick gauge, and they try to convince you that you need to have something the size of your pinky to carry your audio signal when you're only talking about a few hundred watts of power. I personally think it's a scam. I've never run into that. I used to intentionally wire up my cars where when I did the wiring with my friend Franklin Greenway, who's now RIP, sorry to say, he was a great guy. Whenever I used to do those, I used to use the smallest gauge I possibly could, and when people would say, man, you need to get yourself some 00, I'd say, no, I don't. If you understand the way electricity flows through cables and the way that signals actually flow through, you'd realize you don't need that, and you shouldn't get a huge gauge like that, because it's just a waste of money. Anyway, hopefully you haven't just wasted a whole bunch of money on a bunch of thick cable for your car, but if you have, you didn't need to. So there you go. So there you have it, another episode of the Speed Bumps podcast in the can. I am very opinionated as always, all fired up this December episode, the second to last episode. So let's see what happens in the last episode that we will have in 2 weeks, and I will see you then.
If you'd like to ask a sound-related question to be answered in a future episode, send text, audio, or video to ssp@soundspeeds.us. Want to record this outro? Details in the description below. Find us on social media and online at www.soundspeeds.us. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more sound-related content.